Hello and welcome in, guys. Adam here, the Orlando Drummer. Thank you for tuning into another single lesson. Again, today we are on the Pearl Emerge kit, and I decided to toy around with the kit that I'm using. So this kit is inside of the Pearl module. It's a kit titled Legacy. Really cool vintage sounding kit. I did compress the snare and toy around with a couple EQ settings, but otherwise it's a pretty cool kit. Listen how awesome this thing sounds. It's killer. Super rich, beefy, old school kit. I like it. So that's the kit we're using for today's lesson. Now, the notation that you can see on the screen, this is a 30-second note measure. And man, does it look way more complicated than it is. I mean, the contrast between how busy this looks and how simple it actually is to play is pretty extreme. So trust me, if you feel overwhelmed looking at that notation, stick around for a few minutes. I promise I will make this thing seem hilariously simple, because it kind of is. So if you've spent any amount of time inside of the grouping masterclasses here on OrlandoDrummer.com, you probably learned all of the 3, 5, and 7 note grouping. So in this groove, we're using a 3-note grouping of right, left, left, this guy. Easy enough. And then we're using a 5-note grouping, which is basically a right, left, 2 single strokes, in front of that same 3-note grouping. Right, left, left. So if you have those 2 groupings down, that is almost everything that we need to know in order to play this groove. Another easy thing that I want to point out before we get started in breaking down each individual note here is that there's only 2 kick drums in this measure you can see notated. There can be many more kick drums. There's plenty of opportunities within a groove like this where you can place kick drums, especially if you want to just match all of the right hands that fall on the hi-hat. That's really easy to do. But just know that the way I'm teaching it today, to keep things simple and just focus on the groupings, we're only going to play kicks on the downbeat of 1 and the downbeat of 3, so that makes things just that much easier. So let's start out just inside of beat 1. This is an 8-note beat because we're in 30-second notes, but if you can get this down, I promise you can get everything else down. So the very first right hand goes to a closed hi-hat with a kick drum underneath it. Left goes sit on the snare. And right after that, we're going to play our 5-note grouping. But nothing moves. So the right hand still stays up on the closed hat. Left hand still stays ghosted on the snare. So those 8 notes, nice and slow, would sound like this. A little bit faster, same thing. Now, let's add a right hand backbeat that falls on the downbeat of 2. We'll add that right hand accented on the snare and just stop there, so we're effectively playing the first 9 notes you can see in this measure. Now you'll notice that this begins to take shape as we increase the speed. Even at that last tempo, but especially the tempo before that, it sounds kind of robotic. I'm just playing the notes, following along, but there's not too musical of a feel to it yet. That feel sort of emerges, no pun intended, we're on the Emerge kit, but the feeling sort of comes to life with the speed, so just keep that in mind. It's going to feel a little chunky, robotic at these slower tempos. So let's just increase that speed, still of only the first 9 notes, and we'll see if we can get a nice groove for this thing. Notice how much more musical that sounds with just a little bit of speed behind it. Now, that doesn't mean you rush to make this thing feel more musical, right? You can't push the tempo before you're ready or before you have the hand pattern down. But here's the weird thing. We've almost learned the entire pattern so far, because if we zoom over to beat 2, you'll see that the pattern is exactly the same. The only difference is that on the downbeat of 2, where we're playing that loud right hand snare backbeat, you notice that there is no kick drum underneath there on the downbeat of 2. But the rest of that beat matches everything we just played. We still have the same 3-note grouping, right, left, left, except that right hand is on the snare now. And then the rest of the pattern is identical. So if you look at the first 16 notes, or the first half of the measure on the screen, you'll see that that perfectly matches the second half of this groove. So it is literally an 8-note pattern with one change, and that change happens on every downbeat, right? So on the downbeat of 1, it's kick and a hi-hat. On the downbeat of 2, it's only the right hand on the snare, and then that just repeats for beats 3 and beats 4. So, like I said, this is way easier than it actually looks on paper. In theory, you could actually notate this as a 16th note groove, but because it's 30-second notes, I just wanted to keep it honest to how I actually hear it in my head, which is as a 30-second note groove. So, with that said, I'm going to play this entire thing on a loop for you. We'll do it at several different speeds because I know the notes tend to blur as we get this thing faster and faster, so I don't want to lose you. I'm going to play it as slow as I possibly can, and keep in mind that might not have the best feel to it, and then sort of watch for that feel of the groove to appear as we increase the tempo. And yeah, let's play this thing, guys. Now, just for fun, if you want to toy around with this idea, you can try taking the right hands that fall within the 5-note grouping. So each time you see like 2 hats next to each other instead of a 5-note grouping, try moving those to another surface around the kit. Really easy to experiment this way.